Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of my Facebook Live forum here. I'm doing this every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday night to update my constituents on what's going on with the COVID-19 crisis and how your city and community are responding. Tonight, I want to give you an update on our numbers with some good news and some not so good news. I want to talk to you about the governor's announcement yesterday about when we might begin returning to some form of community life. I want to talk to you about the orders issued today by our police department, sheriffs, and other regional law enforcement agencies regarding enforcement of the stay-at-home orders. I want to talk about the city budget and about the local economy. And I want to talk about some of the anti-Asian bias that is being reported in a pretty widespread way, if not in our community, throughout the country. So a lot to cover tonight, and let me begin with the numbers. There is some tough news and some good news, and maybe I'll start with the tough news. The total number of confirmed cases now in the county of Sacramento is 853. That's as of yesterday. That represents more than a doubling of the number of cases over the last 12 days. 32 people have died compared to 10 on April the 3rd. And of course, that's precious life and family members who are grieving, and our condolences and our heart goes out to all of those families. In the city of Sacramento, of the 853 cases, 487 are within the city. We've had 18 deaths within our city as well. Here is the hopeful news. I don't know if you call it good news, but the hopeful news. Our rates of hospitalization and intensive care hospitalizations, the numbers the governor says he first asks about when he wakes up in the morning, are actually trending downward. For example, 2 days ago, there were 28 people in ICU units in Sacramento County. Yesterday, there were 25 people in the ICU unit, so that is a reduction. In terms of overall hospitalizations, our numbers are still low and trending downward. 45 people in the hospital 2 days ago, and of course, our prayers go out to those 45 people, but that is a low number compared to 44 yesterday. Compare these numbers to the statewide numbers. 821 people have died in the state of California of COVID-19, 3,171 people hospitalized, and 1,175 people in the ICU. The number of people in the ICU went down in California by 0.2% in the last day, which of course is a very good sign. Hospitalization went up 1.5%. So even though Sacramento, of course, our county is a relatively small sample, we are keeping on par and in some ways doing even a little bit better than the overall state. Yesterday, of course, the governor talked at length for a much anticipated set of announcements about how the people of the state of California might and will, in fact, eventually return to some form of business and community life. And the way I would describe the governor's very deft presentation is that it is the beginning of the beginning. Not the beginning of the end, but the beginning of a conversation about how California transitions slowly in ways that are consistent with the public health, that are maybe even a little bit conservative, to ensure that as we return to some form of normal life, that we don't see a spike in the number of infections that essentially wipe away all the progress that we have made over the past month by following through on what we have been asked to do. The governor laid out 6 important factors, and I want to review them with you, and he did a good job, but I want to sort of interpret them for the people of Sacramento. First of all, before we can begin having any confidence to reopen restaurants, to reopen businesses, to return people to work, we are going to have to increase our testing capacity. This is well known now, I think, to every Californian and every American. And frankly, it has been a national failure. If you look at one area where we were ill prepared, it was the lack of testing. But rather than looking back and complaining, both at the state level and at the local level, we are working very hard to increase testing capacity, not just to diagnose whether people have the virus, but also the now well-known antibody test that will tell us whether a person has had it, and if they do have it, they're more likely to be, if not immune, less likely to get the virus, and therefore more readily able to return to work. We all know this is about differentiating between people who have tested positive for the virus, who must be quarantined, having a sufficient number of workers, and there may be real employment opportunities for the people, the underemployed people of Sacramento and or the state, to be hired as contact tracers to ensure that those who have been in contact with those who test positive are also quarantined necessarily. We have people who are elderly and who have fragile medical conditions who also probably need to stay inside for longer. And then on the other side, once an antibody test is brought to some level of scale, then we'll be able to know who has had the virus and who is not sick, who've gone through the requisite period of time and are now over it, essentially. Those people can then probably return to work and community life more readily than others. And then there are the people in the middle, those who don't have the antibody, who don't test positive, and who have not been in contact with somebody who has the virus. That cohort of people should also eventually be able to return to work and to some semblance of community life. But until we have the testing in place to a greater degree, it's not going to be possible to make those differentiations that I just described. Here's a very practical example in Sacramento. It was well reported today on the TV news that Verily, which is the company related to Google that is doing the testing at the Cal Expo site, that they're actually encouraging more people to sign up because they have enough tests. At the same time, it is a very important priority, for example, for us to be able to test all the homeless people who are in our existing shelters to make sure that if they are positive, that they immediately move into these trailers we have at Cal Expo or other isolation settings like these motel rooms. Well, we haven't figured out how we can navigate the homeless to the Verily site to be able to be tested. These are coordination issues. It's capacity and it's coordination. And as a state, as a county, and as a city, we are prioritizing doing everything we can to not only increase the capacity, but also increase our coordination so that the Verily site, for example, which was only open to symptomatic people, maybe can be broadened now if they have more capacity to test others so that we can increase our numbers. I know UC Davis or other healthcare systems are also working very hard on this, and I'm working with some of our private sector leaders in Sacramento to see if it makes sense for us to stand up our own testing regimen, not opposed to, but we want to make sure whatever we're doing is in parallel to what the state of California is doing, because even if Sacramento has more testing, if other parts of the region do not, or other parts of the state, people will travel to and from the region. And so ultimately, we want to lead, but fill in where the state of California needs us to be of help here. But that's only one of 6 factors here that will determine whether or not people can resume community life. The other is to ensure that we continue to maintain the capacity in our hospitals and our healthcare systems so that if there is another surge, that the healthcare system can handle it. Now, thus far, the news is great. We are well prepared, but there are plenty of available beds in our hospital system now. And of course, you all know about Sleep Train Arena, where we're equipping that to be overflow. There's nothing wrong with being overly prepared, but if we return to some normalcy, we're going to have to maintain that capacity to ensure that if there is a spike, people can be cared for. We also need to ensure that we have enough masks and ventilators, and the masks are on the way. We do have over 50 ventilators, I believe, in Sacramento County, so far we are in okay shape. We need to make sure that older Californians, older Sacramentans, and vulnerable Californians and Sacramentans can stay in their homes and stay safe. And that includes ensuring that we are really caring for those in our assisted living facilities and our nursing home. 4, we need to have more proven therapeutics so that people who do have the virus and who do get sick can get better. That's one I know that is being worked on. 5, and maybe this is the biggest one, and this is where the governor really talked about the change in lifestyle that we are going to have to adapt to, even when we do return to whatever constitutes normal. And that's the question of whether businesses, schools, and childcare settings can maintain social distancing. So the school year is done. The school districts have started distance learning. We got to get back to school by September. I mean, that everybody knows that. But will school be the same? Will we have to stagger class schedules so that half the students go in the morning to create more space and the other half goes in the afternoons? What about the big comprehensive high schools where there are thousands of students? There are a lot of questions here. But we know that even when we return, we're going to have to return differently. Same thing with the restaurants. God, we want to open restaurants again. Not only is it a source of happiness for people to be able to go out with their loved ones, with their friends, to dinner, to breakfast, but it's also such an important economic underpinning of our community here with our growing food scene and so many working people and small business owners. Well, if we return to opening restaurants, which we will, it may be different. They may have to be half the capacity, and we may need to wear masks. Waiters and waitresses may be wearing masks. We may need to take all kinds of precautions and be washing our hands at the table constantly. We have to get ourselves in a mindset knowing that even when we do return, even return to work, that it has to be different. We can't crowd together in an office and really be disciplined about practicing what we practiced for the last month, but in more settings than just our homes. And the question has arisen a number of times about whether or not we're going to be able to resume large community gatherings, whether it's sporting events, whether it's the theater, whether it's art shows, whether it's big picnics, whether it's festivals. And I think that is a longer time off than the time frame for which we might incrementally return to work and open some of our small businesses, including some of our restaurants, because we just cannot afford to allow people to gather in large settings before there is either this so-called herd immunity where 60% or more of the population are immune because they've had the illness, or we have better therapeutics, or ultimately we have a vaccine. At some point there may be creative ways, as some of the sports leagues are talking about, to resume competitive professional and college sports. But large gatherings are probably the last in the line of community activities that we will be able to reopen. And finally, of course, we need to make sure that we have the data, and this includes all of this contact tracing. We're going to have thousands of people, and it may invoke questions of our privacy too, in terms of what the government knows about all of us. But we need to have the data, so if there is a spike, that the stay-at-home orders can be resumed to whatever degree of severity is necessary to contain the outbreak. So in conclusion, on this score, this is the beginning of the beginning, and it's a good conversation to have. It does it does express a ray of hope, a real hope, that this is not going to last forever. For as the governor said, and I agree, that the current state is not sustainable long term. It's not sustainable economically. It's not sustainable from a mental health perspective for people. It's not sustainable from an education perspective for all our young people. And so we have to begin thinking about how we transition to what we all want to transition to anyways, but do so in a way that is smart. Fortunately, California has shown through its track record, and Sacramento has shown through its track record over the past month, that we're pretty good at finding that balance, even if it is imperfect. Let me shift now to the orders today made by our local law enforcement agencies around the existing stay-at-home order. As you know, we have been very clear that the stay-at-home orders are not some signal that people are going to be arrested in mass numbers because if they technically violate the law. That's never what this has been. This is never what this has been about. It's always been about education. It's about appropriate social pressure, and it's about doing the right thing. And yet this weekend there was apparently a couple of pretty bad displays, these sideshows, these car events where cars spin around and people are trying to get as close to the cars as they can as they're moving. Really dangerous to begin with and illegal to begin with, but the fact that it was such a blatant violation of the stay-at-home orders made it even worse. In addition, we're getting reports of some people holding large parties in their homes. All of that is unacceptable, and so our law enforcement officials are now going to begin citing people who engage in blatant violations of the law. And the citations, which are tickets, though, can come with severe penalties, serious fines, and even potential jail time if people disregard the warnings. And so don't be stupid, and don't act stupid, and don't think you're being a big shot if you're out there doing something that you know is violative of not just the law and the public safety order, but the health and safety of people that you love. Having said that, I just want to re-emphasize, because I know social media, which I try to look at very little actually, is full of rumors that there are going to be curfews and the National Guard is coming out to issue blanket enforcements of the stay-at-home order. None of it is true. Our law enforcement officials are out there helping people, and nobody's going to try to take the hardest of hard line, especially with inadvertent violations. You might get a warning, and you might get asked to, break up that basketball game or something if that's what you're doing. But really, this is intended to say if you're blatantly violating the law, we are going to enforce the law. I fully support that, and I think that is the right thing to do. Let me shift now to the city budget and the local economy. It is never too early to begin planning for the future. And so while we are dealing with the potential surge and the health crisis and the stay-at-home orders and trying to fill all the gaps we can in our city, from food insecurity to homelessness to small business, we also have to look at our own city fiscal situation and our city budget. And there is no question that the city revenues are going to get hit big by the coronavirus. Early estimates say we may lose $60 million less in revenue than what we had anticipated in the upcoming fiscal year beginning July 1st. And so I want to walk you through this just for a minute. Not everybody is a budget detail person, but I think it's really important that I at least try to explain how we are likely to approach this. And I begin with this. As you know, that in November of 2018, my colleagues and I on the City Council asked the voters to approve a 1 full cent for the sales tax known as Measure U. We renewed the first half-cent, which was first passed in 2013, and then we added another half-cent. And I promised, as your mayor, that I would fight to make sure that the second half-cent was spent primarily on what we call inclusive economic development, investing in the economic future in our community with a special emphasis on our disadvantaged communities. Everything from affordable housing to workforce development to investing in our proud but rundown commercial corridors, to small business investments, to more funding for young people and career pathways so that they're prepared for the new jobs of the future. Investing in some of our signature economic opportunity projects like Aggie Square or the Sacramento Mobility Center, the California Mobility Center, and much, much more. And so we've gotten off to a pretty good start. We've invested millions of dollars in the first year towards that end and preparing to do a whole lot more. So here's the truth. Now, as I tell you in real time, the truth is, given the drop that I just described, $60 million in revenue, in all probability, at least for the short, maybe the medium term, that second half-cent of Measure U will be used to balance the city budget and to avoid drastic and dramatic cuts to public safety and other essential services. The economy will recover. And it maybe will recover even faster than we know when we come out of this, although it's a very serious and difficult economic situation for so many people throughout this country. But regardless, eventually we will redirect that second half-cent back to inclusive economic development in our neighborhoods. And so how do we balance our budget? We balance our budget by taking some of that second half of Measure U. We have about $35 million that we were going to invest in those projects. Instead, we'll carry it over. We'll also delay some of our capital improvement projects. We will freeze vacant positions, and we will eliminate a lot of vacant positions that have been vacant for a long, long time, because it's always a matter of choices here. And it's not just about ensuring that the city organization is healthy. It's about ensuring that it's healthy for the long term and that eventually we have money again to be able to invest in our community. But it's not all bad, because while one source of our funding for inclusive economic development, Measure U, recedes, another source of funding emerges. We have confirmed as a city that we will be a direct recipient of the third federal stimulus package. And if you ever had a doubt about whether or not smart growth is a good thing, check this out. The federal stimulus said that if you're a city of 500,000 or more people, you're eligible for a direct stimulus check. If you're less than 500,000, like Long Beach, 495,000, you're not eligible. I hope that's fixed, by the way, lower thresholds in the next stimulus. But regardless, the city of Sacramento, at the beginning of the decade, 2010, was way less than 500,000. You know what the latest census numbers were for 2018? 508,000. We made the cut by 8,000. So I say smart growth, the kind of growth that we are doing here in Sacramento, is a good thing. And what does it mean for Sacramento? It means a check of about $87 to $89 million. The difference between 450,000 population and 508,000, the difference is a world of difference for Sacramento. So then the question is, what do we do with that 87 or $89 million? Well, here's what the law says, and it says it pretty clearly, that the money cannot be used to plug holes in the city budget. So even if that were something that we wanted to do, and I believe we can balance our budget by taking the rainy day we have from the second half of Measure U plus tightening our belts, we can balance our budget. It's not going to be easy, but we can do so certainly over the next year to year and a half. This new source of federal stimulus cannot be spent on plugging our holes. Now, we are still getting legal clarification about what it can be spent on, but I want to tell you, as your mayor, what I think is best. I want to use that as the new source for inclusive economic development in our community. And yes, it is one-time money, but again, there may be a fourth stimulus and a fifth stimulus, and it may just be the beginning here. I want us to go into our discussion about how to spend this money with a couple of principles. One, I want us to take advantage of what we are already poised to do. This city is already poised to be a great destination city. We have great plans to increase our destination amenities for the people of Sacramento, but also for people who live here. And we've got very specific plans how to improve the economic conditions in all of our Sacramento neighborhoods. Everything from workforce development to investing in new and emerging small businesses, to capital investment in our commercial corridors, to youth funding, to affordable housing. And so I want to focus this money on affordable housing. I want to make sure that we take advantage of these new major catalyst initiatives where we have real partners like UC Davis and Sacramento State and SMUD, Aggie Square, and the California Mobility Center. I want us to focus on tourism. I want us to focus on the creative economy. We are on the cusp of something really special when it comes to art and culture in Sacramento. So we need to take these resources and we need to have another community conversation and another city conversation, just like we did when we passed Measure U and after we passed Measure U. Do it in a shorter period of time, because the other requirement here is that all of this money, the $87 to $89 million, must be spent by December the 31st of 2020. So we can't let this money sit around, and we will not. In a way, it's exciting silver lining. One source of revenue goes down temporarily, and another opportunity emerges, and we will take advantage of it. The city budget, of course, is very important, but in some ways it pales in comparison to the real economic suffering that people and businesses are feeling out in the community here in real time. And the city can help, and we are helping, of course, with our $1 million program, and we're raising money and we're filling in gaps in many, many places. I'm very proud of our city, including helping our chambers organize themselves and funding some of their portals and hotlines so that they can help as many small businesses as possible with the federal stimulus. But here's the thing about the federal stimulus. The big plan, of course, is the Paycheck Protection Plan. This was the $349 billion allocated by Congress that says to small businesses, if you keep your employees on the payroll for 8 weeks, we'll loan you a significant amount of money and we'll forgive the loan if you keep your people employed. Well, it has been both a great blessing, and I know our banking community and our chambers and our small business organizations are working really, really hard to get the money out, and there's been a lot of success. But it appears, not surprisingly, that one, it's oversubscribed, and two, the systems, especially at the federal level, are having a hard time keeping up with all of the demand. California businesses have been approved for nearly 55,000 loans totaling over $20 billion. We don't yet have the Sacramento numbers, but we're going to get them. But here's what's pretty clear. There's going to need to be more small business assistance money in future stimulus packages so that we can ensure that as many Sacramento businesses can survive and are getting the help that they need. And of course, for their employees, the stimulus checks are beginning to arrive, and the unemployment compensation enhanced benefits are also beginning to kick in as well. Today, Governor Newsom announced a number of new programs and resources, but I'm especially proud of the fact that he announced that California would do what it always does, and that is step up for people who aren't entitled to federal assistance, undocumented immigrants, all Californians, regardless of their immigration status, who are affected by COVID-19. He's putting forward $125 million. That'll go a long way to helping people, regardless of their immigration status, through these tough times. He also announced that for all of Sacramentans and Californians, that the state EDD, the Employment Development Department, which is also overwhelmed, will extend operations of their call center to help individuals access unemployment benefits now from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. They're also going to set up a one-stop shop for people seeking to access the new federal pandemic unemployment assistance program, which includes independent contractors, includes those who work in the gig economy. And so don't think you're not eligible for assistance. Please call our Metro Chamber. Please call our SAC Asian Pacific Chamber. Please call my office. We will direct you to help if you are eligible. So let me conclude with one sober note and one very optimistic and hopeful note. My office has been hearing reports as have cities across the nation about a rising number of attacks on Asian Americans by people who for some reason hold them responsible for what we are all going through. One national study I looked at today said that between March 20th and April 3rd, just over the last couple of weeks, there have been 1,185 reported cases of attacks and or direct bias against Asian Americans. In Sacramento, we always stand with people who are victimized by discrimination and prejudice. And in Sacramento, we always say, if you are engaging in any behavior that seeks to demean, hurt, or insult people for any reason, but especially because of who they are, stop it. And if you are an observer to any of this kind of behavior, it's our obligation to intervene, to either try to talk to the individual or to do whatever you have to do safely to make sure that the perpetrator does not get away with hurting another human being. Sacramentans are decent, and we have always stood for the best of American values. I know we will continue to do so during this period and for all time. But discrimination against anybody for any reason is abhorrent to who we are. And if you're doing it, stop it. And if you see it, do something to stop it. Finally, a note of good news today. And this is not just like isolated good news, but I think it's also a signal that while our economy is hurting like the rest of the state and the rest of the country, that Sacramento is really poised for a recovery sooner rather than later. Today, the long-awaited Raleys Supermarket opened on Freeport Boulevard. And I'm told that there were long lines outside the door of people waiting to be among the first customers. I'm sure they were physically distant from one another. But the fact that a new grocery store opens tells me a couple things. One, there's enough food, and so you don't have to go about hoarding or doing any of that stuff. But two, that the private sector still has great confidence in the future of Sacramento, and why wouldn't they? Look what we have done over these last couple of years. Major League Soccer is still on track. We're going to get that done. The rail yards development, the waterfront may take a little bit longer. Obviously, our inclusive economic development strategy, which I talked about earlier, we're going to have to tack a little bit, but we are still going to elevate what has been a tremendous economic renaissance in the capital city of California. And finally, a long-awaited affordable housing project, the Lavender Courtyard project, has also been finally approved. And what does that mean? It means over 50 housing units for LGBT seniors. Over half of the units are going to be for people who are LGBT and out on the streets or at risk of homelessness. And to me, that is just a beautiful sign of not only our economic future, because affordable housing is a big piece of what we need to continue to focus on, but also that the best of our values show their beautiful faces every day in every way. Thank you for your time tonight. I will talk to you on Friday night when my special guest, or maybe I'm his special guest, I'm not sure, is Eric Armstead, the great defensive end for the San Francisco 49ers. We're not going to talk so much 49ers, maybe a little bit, but we're going to talk about how he's coping, how we can help our young people, and what Eric's doing to spread some good cheer and good works throughout our community. I'll talk to you on Friday night. Thank you very much.